So today we are joined by the fabulous Paul and Chloe, and I'll pass you over to do your intros, guys. Starting with Paul.
Sure. Glad to meet everybody. Glad to be on the webinar. My name is Paul Morris. I'm a director of engineering at QualityLogic. Been with QualityLogic for 25 years. I'm in accessibility because I happened to go blind and thought that was a bit of a bummer. So I figured out, let's turn that into a strength. So started up accessibility testing services within our company. And we've been doing that for quite a long time now. So we do full service accessibility from end-to-end auditing of products, production of ACRs, through to code remediation and training. So basically full service in the accessibility space. Chloe?
Yes, yeah, great to be here with everyone today. My name is Chloe. I am a senior SEO over at Go Local Interactive. So we are a digital marketing and a tech agency. So we not only work with our clients and other websites, we also build our own themes, software, hosting. So really got into accessibility as soon as I joined Go Local. And most recently, I have been a part of our agency restructure of, how do we think about accessibility as a company, as a software provider, and some of that included integrating Lumar into our processes. So I'm here today as well as a Lumar customer.
Fabulous. We are very excited to have you both. Thank you so much. And let's see, looking at our agenda today, I just have a couple of, we've done introductions. I have to do housekeeping and give a call out to the fact that it's Global Accessibility Awareness Day, actually today, and one of the big reasons for this webinar. So we'll be discussing everything about the European Accessibility Act, how and why it's important to you, developing a program to meet legislative requirements, some of the next steps that you should be thinking about, and then at the end we'll have time for questions and answers. We do just have a little disclaimer in here that the comments and information in today's webinar are based on the presenter's knowledge and experience, and this is not a form of legal advice. So kind of our best practices from the knowledge and experience of our presenters. If you have any questions, please type them into the Q&A box, should be at the bottom of your screen. We can get to those at the end if we have some time. Any feedback from today's webinar is welcomed, less than a minute to complete. We welcome any feedback. And also this webinar will be available in a few days, and it will be shared via email, and it will be on the Lumar website also for you to take a look if you miss it live. Closed captions are available for this. You can enable closed captions, enable live transcript for this also. And as mentioned, this webinar is recorded and it will be distributed in a few days, and that will have all the subtitles included. So we have a couple of poll questions. The first question today: is accessibility already a focus for your website team? And we've listed here some of the responses are yes, we have already started improving accessibility on our website, or sort of, it's on the radar, but we haven't started improving web accessibility yet, or no, we're just getting started. So we're curious about everyone here today, where you're at, if you would like to share. Is accessibility already a focus for your website team? And let's see, it looks like 40% of people said yes, we've already started improving. 55% of people said sort of, it's on the radar, and then 5% of people said no, we are just getting started. So that's great news for us and the webinar that we have to talk about today. It is Global Accessibility Awareness Day actually today. So this is the 14th Global Accessibility Awareness Day. The goal is to get everyone talking and thinking and learning about digital access and inclusion, and the more than 1 billion people with disabilities and impairments. So it's very important that today, especially, it should be every day. Today, especially, we're raising awareness, and anything you can share on social is really helpful. Get involved, www.accessibility.day. Yeah, this is a super important topic and can't wait to get into some of the content. We've got lots of events planned today. Check out the website for more ways to get involved. I have another poll question before we get started. How prepared are you for the upcoming European Accessibility Act? Some of the responses here you can reply are very, somewhat, only just started thinking about it, or not started at all. Let us know if you feel comfortable, how prepared you are for this upcoming European Accessibility Act. We are curious to know. We'll just wait for a couple of more responses. And then once we get those in, we can get started. So it looks like the majority of people have only just started thinking about it. 43% of people said only just started. 38% of people said somewhat. 16% said not started at all. And then 3% said very. So it looks like the majority of people have only just started, which is okay. And today is going to be very useful. So let's see. I will pass to you, Paul, to get started with all about the European Accessibility Act.
All righty, thank you. I'll try to keep this a little light and not go too boring. So the EAA came into being in 2019. So this isn't actually new, but there's been a staggered adoption timeline. So 2019 is when it was adopted by the European Union. 2022, there was a date set for each member nation to produce their own rules and guidelines based on the directive, right? So the directive sets tone, and then each nation had to go and develop that, and those had to be passed in by June 28th of 2022. That then gave them 3 years from that date to bring it into the compliance date, which is naturally what is on everyone's mind, which is June 28th of 2025. Now, the interesting thing is there's an actual brother piece of legislation, which is the harmonized European accessibility, that's based around public procurement, kind of like Section 508 in the US. That was there in many ways to just harmonize how accessibility should be done. Unfortunately, if you're already familiar with that, that's EN 301549, then you're automatically going to know how to meet the requirements of the EAA, because that is going to get into WCAG 2.1 AA testing. So that's the appropriate standard for meeting this requirement. Now, there is another key date which I want to bring up. It's really important. So there's a wonderful Article 32 in the legislation, which says that services may continue to use existing products to deliver the services from before 2025 if it's already in place. And what we interpret that to mean is if you're launching your product after June 28th, you're looking at needing to be compliant as you go out the door. But if you already exist and you don't intend to make any changes to what you have, then you're good through 2030 before it has to be compliant. So there is some date times in there that are important. And the last thing I'll touch on in the EAA is who is impacted. Now, the EAA covers predominantly, it's a lot of public transportation stuff, but it's all about services that are being offered to people. And where it really impacts us digital folks is in the worlds of banking and e-commerce. Now, one of the things they didn't do is define e-commerce. We're looking at that and saying the e-commerce portion is basically anyone that's providing services to a consumer, an end consumer. And by that, I mean a person, the average person on the street, right? So I know this impacts audio, it impacts digital, it impacts ebooks, and anyone that is selling services through a website or mobile application, which is a large number of us, I'm sure. So it does cover a lot of area, and especially banking. So if you're in any of these areas, you're definitely looking at this. One of the other fun parts about the EAA is it's a governing, overarching act, but each member nation has their own enforcement protocol. Each member nation has their own potential fines and enforcement policies, and it's entirely possible for any given company that's doing business in Europe to actually end up with complaints filed from any member nation, and potentially multiple complaints filed at the same time. So this could get really interesting once this is in place. Last thing I'll touch on in this section before handing it back to Rachel is we also don't know about that Article 32 is it says, using the existing product. They don't define what would then qualify for the product to have evolved. And our thoughts are that if the product goes through a fundamental change, like you've got an e-commerce site and you completely rework that accessible checkout or the checkout system, it needs to be accessible in the new mode, because if it's changed from how it is right now, then it needs to be compliant. So that's how we are believing that's going to be interpreted. But again, wonderful thing about the EU is they can introduce some gray areas. So with that, I'll wrap up this opening section and pass back to Rachel.
Fantastic. Thank you, Paul. I'll move on to here, developing a program to meet legislative requirements. Did we have a little bit on that as well? And then I can move into the project timeline slide.
Yeah, I mean, we're going to do that with Chloe, I think, first, and then I'll add on at the end.
Fabulous.
Yeah, absolutely. So when you're thinking about developing all of these program requirements, you also want to think about what needs to meet these requirements. To Paul's point, that's going to be not only if you are a website owner, the website itself, if you are, a software company, a vendor for, your clients, you will need to be compliant there. Anything that's being embedded into your client's websites, anything that they're serving, all of that's also going to come into scope. And then, if you are, say, a vendor, your clients are probably going to ask you for documentation as well on all of your accessibility efforts and compliance. So it's not only going to apply to, say, just the website owners, it's really going to apply to all of the providers that go into that website's existence for the customer's use. Paul, anything to add there?
Yeah, I think it's touching on that third party thing is really important, because a lot of people, when they're bringing their website together, they'll buy in products, right? Like chat bots or whatever it happens to be cool and interesting. You're responsible for that, as is the vendor, of course, that you bring that product in from. So when you're thinking about becoming compliant and getting on board with this, you have to think about all of the other assets that touch your site. It's super important to do that while you're trying to develop your strategy. I'll pass back.
So really the big thing, and probably why you're here, is how do I take all of this and do something with it? Where do I even start? There's so much to be done. And you have to start, like with anything else, at the very beginning. So start with identify your priorities, identify, to Paul's point, there's different enforcement and different legislation in different member nations. Identify what do you specifically need to meet, what's applicable to your software, website, business, make sure you are scanning against the correct set of guidelines. Make sure you identify any manual work that needs to be done. We're here today with Lumar, which has some fantastic automated scanning abilities, but an automated scans can't do everything. So identify what are all the things we need to do manually as well. And then that's where you're going to start with your benchmark scans, with your list of priorities, so that then you can actually spend the time making an effective plan. Then from there, sorry, go ahead, Paul.
Sorry. Oh, I was just going to say, and you're probably going to touch on this, then developing your roadmap, which is an asset. We're starting to see people want to get from people.
Absolutely. It's you have to take everything that you've got and run your benchmark scans. Then you're going to want to go through prioritization and collaboration. So start with identifying those priorities. So you want I know that can sound really overwhelming to do when you're confronted with a giant list of hundreds of items impacting all of the pages on your website. What we do and what we find helpful is to start with some key questions. So think about, how impactful is this item? Is this item a safety issue like screen flicker? That can be a safety issue for photosensitive users. Is this something that impacts just one page and maybe it's a 10-year-old blog that gets 3 sessions a month? Or is this something on the homepage where you're getting 30,000? Are you seeing perhaps particular code snippets or embedded software, things like that, impacting a large number of pages versus just one page? So you can take all of that to really help identify, okay, here are the most critical items. These have the largest impact. These are the items that will be very visible and provide, create challenges for your customers. Then from there, what I really recommend, and this is where I love to provide some guidance from what we've learned. The next step after you do some of that prioritization is collaboration. Before you start, meet with your developers, meet with your vendors, meet with a SaaS team, whoever you need to talk to understand what resources are available. How can we work within your established workflows to get things done? Talk through with them. Here's our goals. Here's what we want to tackle. Here's the deadlines we're trying to work around. What can we get done? That collaboration is going to get you a lot farther than shoving tickets and documentation at a vendor and saying, fix it. Understand how to work with them and to collaborate together. Build that workflow so that you know what you have to provide to them for them to be able to do anything. And then also establish with them what you need from a QA process, how you need them to send things back to you for approval and recheck, validation, so that you are working together to create a workflow that works across teams, departments, companies, as opposed to everyone just shoving issues back and forth and saying, you should fix this. No, I needed you to scan it. No, you didn't give me whatever export I needed, or this ticket didn't go in the right place. That will set you up for success, especially when you're working on such a tight timeline. And, for where we're at in this process, where there's only 6-ish weeks left, there are potentially quite a few items that need addressed, and you may not be able to get all of those done in 6 weeks. It might be a miracle to get all of them done in 6 weeks, but you can prioritize to get the most impactful ones done first, and then you'll have a roadmap and understand, okay, after June 28th, the things we couldn't get to, here's what we need to work on. Paul, is there anything else you want to add for the roadmaps?
Yeah, I think the thing I'd like to just touch on there is you're going to need a roadmap to present to people that demand it, right? Unless you're going to be compliant on the day. or as I said earlier, if you're not doing any updates and you're good today, then you don't need to be compliant right on the 28th, but it's going to start being an increasing expectation. So you need to have assets to prove where you're at, because people are going to demand it if you're in a non-compliant state. And you should also then be demanding that of any vendors that you work with, right? So let's use that chatbot example. You could well be asking your vendor to provide you with an ACR, an accessibility compliance report for their widget, their product. And if they're not compliant, a roadmap for when they will be. These are important assets that you can collect so that if people address things to you, you have those on hand and you can supply them, because I think that that's going to be a necessary thing to have in your archive of not only what do we have and where are we, but also any vendors that we work with. So that's what I have to
Absolutely.
say on that. Yep.
Absolutely. Once you've really got all of that road mapping done, that's where you get to the meat and potatoes of it. That's where you go through the program runtime, you provide your developers all the roadmap items you've assigned out, any, resourcing, things like that. I recommend that while, say, developers are doing that, if we have anybody on the call that's in SEO, that is, day-to-day, or just somebody with access to a CMS, do some of the things that you can do without developer support while they're working on items that you can't fix and you're waiting on being able to run some validation. Work on some other items. You might have a lot of image alt text to write. You might be able to go in and fix some improper heading structures yourselves. You might be able to fix some text size. Do some of those things that don't need them so that you can continue to make more progress. You can spread the kind of workload across multiple teams, multiple people, and it's not one poor developer that's trying to fix all of these at once. And around that, then make sure that you're working with your developers or your vendors to go through that validation as well. Always validate. If somebody says something's fixed, just give it a double check. Make sure that you see that reflected on what is on your end so that you can feel confident a customer sees the same thing. Well, after you've got a lot of that, the deadline is approaching on June 28th. One of the things that you can't forget is going to be the accessibility statement. So every website, even if you've got a software, your software's probably got a website, there needs to be an accessibility statement. You'll absolutely want to check for, your country or countries that you serve, what specific requirements are there. So different member nations have different requirements of what the accessibility statement page needs to say. At the very least, make sure that you are providing detail on that you are working on accessibility, a contact place. If someone needs assistance or accommodation, give them a way to reach out to you, give them a way to provide feedback, all of those things that will help, not only make you compliant, but provide a good experience for your users, for your customers to access the goods and services they want to be able to use. And as with always, whenever you're writing a statement like that, a disclosure, you do want to run that through legal if possible. We always recommend that. And then lastly, the deadline's approaching on June 28th. You've been doing all of this work, right? You've been making all of these preparations. Think about how you're building a system that's going to continue to serve you after June 28th. How are you putting recurring checks in place and testing and QA in place to help prevent future issues in, say, the development cycle before they even go live, so that you are not pushing out any non-compliant changes? Perfect. And then just to, wrap it up with, what are your next steps? What do you take away from here? Start with identify your priorities. What guidelines do you need to be meeting? Run those benchmark scans. Use that and, all of your checks to get together with your team, have a roadmap, identify who has what resourcing, who can help you, and then you're able to run from there and make some progress. Then through all of that, continue to work on the manual checks that you can, the items that say, while a team of developers, while the SaaS team may be working on something, what can us non-developer folks make our way through to help contribute to this effort, making sure that you're addressing those most critical items first, validate all those fixes, work on your accessibility statement, make sure that you're providing that to your users, especially, make sure that's up before June 28th, preferably. And then after June 28th, just continue to work through the remaining items in your roadmap, work through the structures that you have built in order to continue to ensure compliance for any new changes, software pushes, things like that. Paul, anything you want to add as we wrap up?
Yeah, there's just a few things I'd like to touch on briefly. So first and foremost, if you're feeling a little overwhelmed, figure out how to get some help. I mean, there are companies like Chloe's, companies like mine, Lumar, who all have tools and services which can help you get to where you need to be, right? Manual checks. We find that they're best done by people that actually have the physical cognitive issues that cause them to use assistive technology. That's part of our standard practice, is to have people using that. And frankly, it's also because a lot of people, when they're faced with a screen reader, they're overwhelmed by it. It's not trivial to do that. So ensure that you've got subject matter expertise on tap to where you can find the solutions. You're going to find lots of tools out there. You're going to find amazing claims that just by putting this thing in place, you'll suddenly be able to fix your entire website and make it compliant. Please do not be misled by that. The tools cannot do it, and they certainly can't do it all. Scanning tools like Lumar obviously can help you identify issues that are there, but you might even need some training for your devs, some training for your designers on what does it take to make an accessible product, right? I know for a fact that a lot of developers will go online, they'll ask the AI, they'll ask Google, how should I fix something like this? And it'll usually point them straight back to using ARIA, which is not usually the best solution. So just be a little cautious with where you get your information, how you determine the best resolution path. And I'm certainly going to say, look to the subject matter experts. And something I did want to briefly touch on is you're going to be expected to have an accessibility compliance report. That's something which you can prepare using the VPAT 2.5 EU. You can prepare it yourself, or you can have a company prepare it for you. But ultimately, you're going to need that asset along with your accessibility statement. And ideally, we like to see those linked in the statement so that somebody doesn't have to go looking for it, or worse yet, actually have to ask for it. So for your next steps, find your subject matter experts, incorporate them into your process, lean on the experts when it comes to how to assess some of this stuff if you don't have the skills already at this time. And I think that's how I'll wrap up this section.
Thank you very much, Paul and Chloe. Did want to highlight in Lumar, so a couple of, we have the accessibility tool. You're able to identify website accessibility issues at scale, save time with effective prioritization, get fewer false positives and automated QA testing. And this is aligned to WCAG 2.2A through to AAA. We also do have the Lumar's Web Accessibility Wiki. You can explore common website accessibility tools on there. And we also have some code examples and suggested fixes, which you can access with that QR code there to just scan. We have the final poll of this webinar, and that is, would you like a demo of the web accessibility audits in the Lumar platform? let us know. You can get in touch and we can give some demos out for free. There's that poll there. If you respond here, we will be in touch. And when that is done, I will move to some questions. So we did have a Q&A from the chat. I'll start with that one, Paul and Chloe, and that one is, as an SEO review provider to small businesses, what tools do you suggest I use to check that their sites meet the most important requirements of accessibility? I currently look at the list given by pagespeed.webdev and the Axe extension. Thank you.
Well, I'll jump in immediately and say, well, Lumar is an option, obviously, because it can do your scanning. And the good part about Lumar is it can do it at scale. AxeDev is an excellent tool. You can certainly utilize that, but just bear in mind that that's only going to take you so far. Another good free one is Wave. There's also TGBAI's Arc. Those are all good tools and they will help you find issues. Our estimation is they'll find you about 50 to 60% of the issues at the very best. Most people think more conservatively about 40 to 50% of the issues. The rest has to be done manually at this time. And I'll just give a little bit of context around the why. If you've got headings on your page and you've got a heading level 1 and heading level 2, it takes a human to actually try to decide whether the heading level 2 is a child of that heading level 1, or if it should have actually been a different heading level, as in another heading level 1, or it's really intrinsically difficult to associate content of whether it should or should not be ordered in that way. Another good example is alt text on a graphic. Should that graphic actually be tagged decorative because it doesn't provide any useful information? Those are things which are going to need to be assessed by a human, but the tools will get you a good starting point. So you're already on the right track with AxeDev. Chloe, did you have anything to add there?
Yeah, no, I think you touched on it's really the importance of manual review. On top of that, it's great to start with some of those scanning tools, especially when you don't know where to start. You may also need to loop in some specialized tools. So for example, we loop in an American tool called Pete, which tests for screen flicker through application loads and page loads. So you may need to also, depending on what your website provides, source out some additional specific tools based on what you need to test for. But after, I know the manual testing can be intimidating. Those scans can be really helpful to give you a place to start, but we still want to make sure we're working in manual review.
Thank you. That was the Q&A. We did also have a question in the chat from earlier on. Do we think it would be relevant to B2B companies selling software services?
That's a great question. And the answer is going to be very much depends. So if you think about the services you sell, one of the wonderful words they use in the EAA is the word services, but it's very much pointing to the end consumer. So if you're selling a service to another company and that company is then serving it up to the populace at large, then yes, it is very relevant to you. If, however, for example, you're doing like a business intelligence type of service, which is used internally by another business and it never makes its way into the general populace, at the moment we think, no, it probably doesn't apply to you. But it all comes down to that data flow of where your service ends up. If it at any point will end up with a consumer, we think that you're very much going to be needing to be compliant.
Yeah, Paul's example from earlier is a great one. Things like chatbots, or if you serve, interactive map functionality, or, various, widgets, certain graphics, all of that, probably then the answer is yes, especially if that's making that onto the consumer site.
Thank you both. Let's have a look at another question. We have this one. What are the most common accessibility issues found on websites today? What are the potential quick wins we should look at auditing and fixing first?
I can certainly speak to that. Do you want to go first, Chloe?
Yeah, I see a lot of them, especially when we, as an agency, will inherit something we sure didn't build. And some of those quick wins can be as simple as these brand colors in this theme are not even sort of an appropriate contrast ratio. Change to a secondary brand color so that things are legible. If you get handed a page with, a white background and very light gray text, that's a quick update that you can make that probably applies either site-wide or template-wide to resolve a lot of issues that are very visible to consumers. So things like text contrast and size, I see a lot. I see a lot of, especially in things like educational content or blog content, people using very beautiful and lovely graphics that convey wonderful information that does not make it anywhere else on the page. And it's not particularly appropriate to write 12 paragraphs in the alt text for a screen reader to read. Then just having them rework that page to include all the information in the text of the page. Some of those things like that are ways you can, easily make a larger change that makes as a whole that information or those pages accessible.
Yeah, and I'll just add on to that some other things that I see all the time, which should be pretty quick wins. I see a lot of buttons which don't have labels, right? They're just, for me, it's just button 0. Ensuring that all of the controls have good labeling. I would say that possibly not quite so quick is ensuring your code is compliant with the HTML standard. The fact is that good compliant HTML is your best path to accessibility. So I would look for things like that. And obviously, if you can structure your content in such a way whereby it's just easy for people to follow, don't assume things like directionality. So for example, if you have instructions, don't think about left side, right side, because that doesn't apply to screen readers. Think about just having a nice ordered content whereby use of headings can help somebody like me navigate to where I want to be on that page quickly and efficiently. And without that, and things like landmark regions, which are also frequently a super easy, quick win, putting in all of the standard ones like a navigation, a main, and a footer, and a header really help people get around, and they're going to help doing that. And the other one, which is super simple, an obvious fail for the WCAG, the skipping content block, right? That's an easy thing to put in the website. Basically, it's skip to main content. You'll see that as a link in accessibility world. If you don't have that, that's something that needs to be there. So those are the things I'd say for the really fast, easy wins.
Amazing. Thank you both. I think leading on from that question, this one, I understand that accessibility overlay widgets aren't fixes for true website accessibility compliance and aren't fully accessible for users. What can I say to my team if they are suggesting using overlays as a quick fix?
I'll touch on this one first, and I'm sure Chloe will probably have something to add on this, but I want to give you a little tiny story. When I land on a website and it's got one of these widgets, I have a really negative reaction to it. Because the first thing it does is it tells me, hey, would you like to use this website in an accessible mode? Now, number one, I know that if I say yes to that, if I click the button, it isn't going to do it because fundamentally it doesn't work in almost every case. So it tells me two things about the brand. Number one is they haven't done their research. They don't know that these things don't work very well. And number two, they paid some lip service to making it accessible by doing the minimum, and or possibly they've been misled into believing that they're now compliant. But what it says to me is, Paul, you are different and you don't get to have the regular experience. It's very polarizing. It's basically being told, you're different and here's your special experience because you don't get to participate in the regular experience. It really does cause a reaction in me. So one of the things that I would say if I was talking to my development team is, number one, is functionally it's not going to do what I need it to do. And number two, there's a very much polarizing thing that can happen where you are actually going to get people very upset and potentially even more upset than if the website just wasn't very accessible in the first place. There is actually a good amount of traffic, I will not name names, around at least one very prominent accessibility overlay tool where they're being somewhat sued for their non-compliance and the fact that they sell as being compliant. So really sticky gray area that I would recommend people stay away from. Chloe, anything to add on that?
Yeah, I absolutely sympathize with anyone that gets this question because I get it a lot, and that's sometimes a conversation that has to be repeated several times, but just emphasizing that, to Paul's point, just throwing this widget on there is not an excuse to not do accessibility. It fundamentally doesn't fix the issues. It at best, then it's a band-aid for some potential issues, but you are not addressing the root of the problem. You are not, building any sustainable future-proof updates to the website, because if you uninstall that widget, you have made no progress. So it really doesn't serve you in the end. Efforts are better spent actually putting in the work, which does take time and effort, but you are better served as, website owners, as vendors, but also your users, your customers are better served by you just putting in the effort.
And I'll just finalize that with, I have yet to visit a website that has one of these widgets in play that is accessible and easy to use. I've yet to meet one that uses the widget and is easy to use.
That's so interesting. Thank you both for sharing that. My goodness. Sorry, Paul, did you have anything to add there?
No, I'm good. Thank you.
Yeah, it's baffling, isn't it? It does seem like a quick fix, and then when you hear that story, Paul, it just puts everything into perspective. We had a question in the chat from Geraldine. Is it appropriate to use accordions for text descriptions of infographics so it doesn't use up a lot of screen space? What do we think about that question?
I think you can use accordions if you code it correctly. And I say code it correctly. Be wary that some of the component libraries that exist don't have accessible components, and that's really frustrating. So, or they don't support the appropriate level. I don't know where it stands right now, but for example, Bootstrap, which was a very popular component library, only supported 2.0 AA for the longest time, and that may still be true. So be very careful when you're using things like accordions. They have to be done right, and they have to be screen reader accessible. That can often mean that you're talking about lots of extra JavaScript to make those work because they are not kind of a native control as such. They need to be augmented with ARIA. So be very careful with an accordion. It's not a bad idea to have them, but again, just ensure that they're coded right, they're tested thoroughly. It's going to complicate matters from an engineering perspective, but if it's done right, it's fine, in my opinion.
Thanks, Paul. Chloe, did you have anything to add on that one?
No, Paul took the words right out of my mouth, because the short answer is, did you code it right?
Fabulous. Yeah. We did have another Q&A Is the reading mode in Chrome a good indication of what screen readers do?
Nope.
No.
Just,
Short and
just
sweet.
no. Yeah,
Right, understood.
but, and I will just build on that rather than just giving the humorous nope. The reading mode is literally just going to go and try to read you the page. That's not how a screen reader works. They're much more nuanced than that. Imagine if you visited a web page and you're just going to go ahead and have it read to you. You'd go insane by the third page, right? You don't want to hear all of those heading links. You don't want to hear everything else. You need to be focusing on the screen reader experience, which is having those headings, having properly tagged controls, having distinct header, footer, main, all of the regions that can be defined. Ensuring that you don't then go too far and end up with 5 different navigation regions that are all called navigation region. That's one that drives me insane. I'm on a website and I'm navigating by region, and it says, header, navigation region, navigation region, navigation region. I don't know where I am by the third one. So it's going to come back to that properly decorated HTML. And unfortunately, it does mean having either somebody on your team that can use screen readers or utilizing a group that can provide that service for you. So that's longer than no, right?
Yeah. It's really interesting. Thank you, Paul.
Mhm.
And I think unless we get any more in the chat, we just have one more question. So that is, does the EAA introduce any new web accessibility requirements that are separate from or go above and beyond the WCAG compliance standards that we know of?
My instant answer to that one is it it is basically WCAG 2.1 AA, but the best way to deal with this is to go and look at the standard EN 301-549. I actually popped that into chat a little bit ago. That is going to be exactly the same standard. It's laid out, and for once, it's easy to find so long as you know the magic keyword of EN 301-549, and that will explain essentially all of the things that you need to follow to get your stuff reported correctly. And of course, the VPAT 2.5 EU is the way to build that accessibility compliance report, which will also guide you on all of the standards that are required. But essentially, WCAG 2.1 AA is what you need.
It's also good to keep an eye on, like with every other thing, there are always new versions and things like that. 2.2 came out a year and a half, 2 years ago now, so that's WCAG 2.2. The EAA was not written for 2.2. 2.2 did not exist then. However, it may be updated to 2.2, so you also want to keep an eye out on any updates to legislation to meet new guidelines that arise in the future, either from the EAA itself or from specific member nations that may have updates to their.
Absolutely. And I would just add on that to go from 2.1 to 2.2 is not a huge stretch. It's not that difficult. So from my perspective, especially as a person that, is an assistive tech user, shoot for the moon, go for 2.2 AAA if you can do it. But at the very least, just go with 2.2. You lose very little by doing it, and you gain future proofing. So definitely try to do it if you can do it, and prioritize your 2.1, of course. But if there's a few things in 2.2 and there really weren't many updates between the two, only 7 more success criteria, I think it was. So, adopt them. If you can do it now, better to do it now than push it out down the road.
Thank you both. We did have this question come in. Is the EAA more about websites specifically, or does it also impact the end user's platform, e.g., a product that is going to be used almost exclusively by doctors?
So you're getting into somewhat of a specialized area with that one, right? Because there are some assumptions that need to be made about medical practitioners, which mean that they are potentially not going to have some physical or cognitive limitations. But it is indeed possible for a doctor to have color blindness. So if you're not meeting those color criteria, and it's something that they as an end consumer are paying for, then it could well be incorporated into this as e-commerce. And I know it sounds silly to say e-commerce, but they're using it very liberally. And we have to assume that that means anything that people are buying that is a digital platform. And I'm saying that for the sake of safety. I would not want to say that, oh, well, e-commerce is essentially, you know, your Amazon or whatever. It could be far more than that of anyone that's paying for a solution. So I would say that if it's a medical practitioner, you could potentially take a dice roll on it, but I would not advise that that could be a path forward. And just to flesh out the rest of that, this is not just web, it's mobile, it's even kiosk level terminals that, you know, you're going to go and buy a train ticket or something from a train station. That terminal needs to be accessible. It's pretty far reaching and it touches a lot of endpoints. So I would say that if somebody is buying your service, it's better to be compliant than not. It's the best advice I can give.
You don't regret being overly compliant, right?
Yep.
My gosh. Well, thank you both so much. It looks like we've covered the questions from the chat and the Q&A. So with that, if you would like to dive deeper, we have the QualityLogic monthly newsletter around digital accessibility news and updates. That's a great way to keep up to date. Lumar also has the industry roundup on the blog, the Lumar industry news. We also talk about accessibility items on there. It's a great way to keep up to date. And then we do have our next webinar on June the 4th, and that's going to be technical SEO in the age of AI. So that'll be a really interesting one, and sign up, and it will also be available later on the Lumar blog along with today's webinar. So thank you so much for joining. Thank you so much, Paul and Chloe. It's been so interesting hearing these insights, and it's been wonderful having you. Can't wait for the next one. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Rachel, for hosting us.
Oh, of course, yeah.
Thank
Thanks,
you.
Chloe. Thank you, Paul. And thanks, everyone. We'll speak soon.
Thank you.
Thanks.